Hello, my name is Mike Geig, and in this video, we're going to look at how we can bring Revit data into Unity using the PiXYZ plugin for Unity 2018.3. We're going to look at the import process and workflows that allows us to bring in our BIM data from Revit or any IFC file into Unity and then improve the look using things like the toolbox and rules to give ourselves something very visually compelling. This will allow us to bring in data from Revit, AutoCAD, really any IFC standard format into Unity so that we can do some really cool interactive things with them. So here I am in Unity in a scene that has some lighting stuff and some other objects that are currently disabled. Really nothing here is doing much of anything. And I already have the PiXYZ plugin imported. So I can see that here in my plugins folder. And if I go to my PiXYZ top menu, I can see here that I could check out the license manager or about or any of these other things that I'm going to get into shortly. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to bring in a piece of data. I need to import something into my project. So I'm going to go up to PiXYZ and I'm going to go to import model here. And I'm going to choose a data file that I want. In this case, I'm going to use this Rosa Parks residence rosaparks.ifc, and I'm just going to hit open, and this is going to bring me to my import menu. Now I have the ability to specify some presets here which I don't need right now. Maybe I can use later if I want to start automating this process, but right now I don't have any. And I'm going to leave the scale, the right-handed, the Z up. These are all fine as default. They're going to try to detect what type of model or where this comes from and do some stuff for us there. The one kind of really important thing that I need is this metadata checkbox. That's what's going to bring in all my BIM data, and I absolutely want that. I could create LODs, but I'm not interested in level of detail settings there, so I'm going to leave that, and I could choose, if I wanted to iterate quickly, I could choose maybe a poor quality. However, maximum is going to work fine for me here. One thing I do want to pay attention to is I will be applying some materials and textures in Unity, and as such, we need those UV channels there. So I'm just going to click Create CH or Channel 0 UVs. Additionally, if I wanted to do a bunch of light baking and stuff, I could generate light map UVs. However, I'm not super interested in that right now. I don't need to override shaders. And if I wanted to, I could have Unity automatically apply materials, assuming I had some materials with the same names in the resources folder. I don't. Again, I'm going to leave that alone. One thing I do want to make sure that I do, though, is click this Create Prefab. That way it's going to create a prefab in Unity for me to reuse, which would enable me to use Live Sync. However, I'm not going to be doing those right now. So with this set up, really all I'm doing here is just turning on the Create Channel 0 UVs. I'm going to click Import. And this is going to import. The whole process takes, for this data set, about 40 seconds. Okay, so now the data has finished importing. However, it's placed somewhere in my scene. If I were to click on it in the hierarchy, I can see the sort of pivot or origin. But due to the way this was modeled in Revit, it's not really centered on the object itself. And so I'll address that here momentarily. But before I do that, I just do want to talk a little bit about the data that came in. So as I expand this, I can see all of these pieces of data, all of these either meshes or nodes or whatever that have come in from Revit, and all of them with this metadata on them that allows me to see that, this is maybe plywood sheathing and, any particular, important information, whether it's, support or whether, just all of this important data that we require and we want to work with. All right, so if I were to double click on this, I will get taken way up here to where I can now see this piece of model data. And right now it's pretty dark, so I'm going to turn off lighting in my scene. We'll address the lighting issue later. And I'm just going to approach here and start thinking about ways that I can make improvements to this piece of data. So we can see we have these sort of odd silhouette trees and stuff like that, and everything comes in with the color that it had in Revit, which might be useful for sort of visualization techniques and stuff like that, and maybe engineering and stuff. And we could keep that, but I'm also going to look at replacing these materials with something that looks a little bit better. But a lot of times, besides these sort of broad changes, there are a lot of spot corrections we can apply as well. So for instance, if I were to look at this couch here, and I could see the back of this couch, and let me just double click to fix that zoom issue there. The back of this couch is a different mesh than this piece sort of right next to it. And so we may want to make that all one piece. because there's no real reason for these to be two separate meshes. So what I can do is I can select just this back piece and then also select the rest of this couch here. And then using the PiXYZ toolbox, I can actually merge this geometry together. So I can just right click on it and go down to the modify and just choose merge. And it's going to tell me or ask me if I want to merge these objects together. I'm going to hit execute. And there we go. And so there's no real reason for some of these pieces to be separate like that. And I actually have quite a cool toolbox here that allows me to do a lot of things. I can create, custom applications. I can use a lot of these built-in ones, adding things and doing a lot of filtering and changing and stuff like that. And so that's great. The toolbox is great for these sort of spot corrections. But what if I need to apply a lot of these spot corrections? Like for instance, as I saw before, the trees or materials or adding lights or even just fixing the position and rotation of this entire data set in the world. Well, that's where we get into things called rules, where we want to create a rule that's going to be applied all over. This is great when I want to maybe iterate and bring in a data set multiple times and I don't want to have to redo a lot of the little granular work. Or if I want to create some defaults of the way I work. So a similar naming in Revit, a similar naming scheme or structure scheme that all of my models can come in and utilize these same rules and then save myself a ton of time. So let's take a look at how those work. And so as I had mentioned before, we have this piece of geometry, this residency here, and it's sort of floating out in space, sort of away from everything else, and I'd like to fix that first and foremost. And so I have this folder here called rules, and I have many rules in here. And the way these rules were created, you can create any rule by right-clicking, going to create, PiXYZ, and then rule. However, like I said, I have several here. And if I click on this full resort processing, you'll see that I have actually many rules already set up here. This is sort of my catch-all that I can apply. We'll look at this later. That's going to do a whole bunch of things all at once that I could apply all at once to save myself some time. But I'm going to look at some individual ones right now. So the one I'm interested in right now is this center in scene. And I can see here that the rule for center in scene says get the latest imported model, right? So the last one that I've imported there. And then I'd like to move the origin to the center of all of the geometry. So it's actually going to move that pivot point we saw down below up to the middle of this. And then we're going to move the whole bit of geometry down to the scene's origin of 0, 0, 0. And now I'm just going to go ahead and hit run. And obviously my residence area will disappear there. And if I double click on it again, I will see that it is now down here where I'd like it to be. And if I click on my game view, you can see there that now I can see it here as well. So it's down in front of my camera now, which is good. So the next thing I'd like to do is I'd like to look at some of these things like these trees that are in my scene, because obviously they look a little weird here. Now, this is going to require another rule that I have here, which is called replace trees. And replace trees is, again, going to grab this last imported model. I could tell it to just grab everything in the scene or whatever, but it's going to grab this last imported model, and it's going to start filtering on these properties. And so what that means is it's going to look for any property that has reference in the name and that also has a value for that property that contains Aspen. And so if I click on one of these trees here, and I look at its data, I can see that this is this tree that is this large tooth aspen. And so it's going to find this aspen here. And it's going to say, okay, these are one of the things that I'd like to change. And so what's going to happen then is what this rule will do is it's going to, wrong one there, it's going to replace this object with this birch tree. And then it's also going to randomize the sort of rotation and scale of the tree, so they're not all the same looking tree. So they're going to all be slightly different sizes, slightly different rotations, which is really going to add to the effect. Now, if you're in Unity 2018.2 or earlier, you could just run this and that's fine. Due to the improved prefab workflows of Unity 2018.3, running this right now won't work. Because what's going to happen is it's going to try to delete these billboard trees and replace them with these birch trees. However, with the new improved prefab workflows in 2018.3, you cannot directly delete a game object out of a prefab without sort of being in this isolated mode. And so to fix this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right-click on this residency, this Rosa Parks area here, and I am just going to unpack that prefab, which is going to break that prefab connection, which is fine. I can always just turn it back into a prefab. And now that I've done that, I'm just going to go to replace trees. I'm going to click run, and we're going to see that's going to replace all of these trees in my scene with something slightly better looking. I can also do the same. We have these rocks that are all fairly similar, and I can randomize those rocks. There we go. Just again, add a little bit of distinction to these elements of my scene. Now, there's more things that I could potentially do here. So at this point, I really wouldn't mind improving my lighting quite a bit. And so I'm going to turn lighting back on here, and I'm going to see now that it's fairly dark in front of this building because this is set up to have the sun setting behind it, which you can see here. This is just Unity's procedural skybox, putting that sun behind me there. And so I'd like to add some lights. Well, I have several light fixtures in this scene as part of the geometry, and so let's go ahead and replace those. So I'm going to go to the add lights, and again, I'm going to grab the latest imported model. I'm going to filter on lighting, and I'm going to move sort of the center of the light to the center of the bounding box of the lights geo, and then I'm going to add this light prefab there. And so when I click run, we're going to have lights add to our scene. Now the last one I want to talk about here is this replace materials. And so these materials that it comes in by default from Revit are going to have names as they had there inside Revit. They're going to be these standard colors or whatever. Now those are fine for, like I said before, some form of visualization, but I'd like to replace these with something a little bit more useful for lighting and a little bit better looking for some of this visualization stuff. And so I have a rule to do that because it can be kind of slow to sit there and have to replace all of these sort of one at a time. And so if I look here, I can see that I have several sort of rules set up within this one rule where I'm going to replace individual materials first, and then I have a catch-all for all of the other ones, all right, because a lot of these materials are shared across multiple objects. So I can see that first thing I'm going to do is set materials for the ballast, set materials for the roof, the outside furniture, and then the parquet, and then finally I'm going to say, okay, so everything that I didn't replace with one of those other rules, here's my general just sort of table, my lookup table of this material becomes this material. And as such, now when I run this, I'm going to have these materials be applied across my scene. And again, it takes a little time to set up the rule, but then every time I bring in some geos, some data from Revit, I get that there. Now granted, these materials are from a stock library. They have not necessarily been optimized for this scene, but you could see that, if I were to spend a little time doing that, it's very easy to get really impressive visuals just with a couple clicks of the mouse. Now, there are a few other things that we can do here that are part of my full rule set here. Some of the things being like add colliders and things like that, set it to static in case I want to do any batching. One of the things, creating colliders can be important if you're trying to build a simulation out of this. This geometry comes into Unity without any form of physics, without any form of collision. And as such, if I needed a character that was able to walk around on the ground or to go through doors and things like that, I wouldn't be able to. By adding colliders, however, I could just click this and it's going to simply just add colliders to all of the things in my scene, which is pretty cool. At that point, I could turn on, say, some interactivity and press play, and we could see that now our building is this physical entity, and it will bounce and provide a stable surface for things to walk on. We got some basketballs that are now raining from the sky and whatever, just to sort of prove the point. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about here is now I have this piece of geometry in my scene, and I've replaced the materials, I've added lights, changed the trees, all these really cool things. That is a lot of the stuff that we could do with the PiXYZ import process, but it doesn't really end there. We have a lot of other capabilities, one of which being this thing called Unity's post-processing. Especially if we're going for these greater visuals, then post-processing can really help. So I have this scene here that looks pretty decent. However, I'm not using things currently like color grading and screen space reflections, ambient occlusion for a lot of contrast and edge shadows, and bloom for light softness and to really sort of round our scene out. And so these are things that are just part of Unity, and I could just set these up. There are a lot of just, sliders and stuff we can mix and match and choose. And I'm just going to turn this object on here, which is going to enable this profile. And we're going to see that that's going to allow us to add a lot of warmth and a lot of brightness to our scene and really sort of, again, round out the sort of visual appeal, where, you know, in one way it sort of looks still kind of dark and flat, and the other way it really looks like that sort of golden hour when the sun is setting, and we can see, you know, a lot of those yellows and oranges across our scene there. So at this point, what we've really seen is that I have been able to bring in this data set and apply all these rules. But again, the idea being that we want fast iteration, I can actually make this an even faster, more automatic process if I'd like. So let's say I wanted to apply these rules not manually once I brought in a data set, but I wanted them to be applied just automatically. Well, when we imported the data set previously, we saw that there was an option for something called a preset. And so I could just anywhere right click, go to create my project view here, go to PiXYZ, and these sort of import settings. And in here I can already set the things like my transforms, by hierarchy, quality level details, do I want these light maps, things like that. And then I can apply these when I import something. So if I were to go back to PiXYZ import model, and I were to pick this IFC, at this point here, I could say, all right, well, let's just grab these import settings, drop them on here. And so it's automatically now going to have this sort of stuff. So again, I can automate this process. I don't need to pick and choose. And perhaps I have different import settings for the different LODs or mesh qualities, because we can get pretty granular with doing stuff with these LODs and what we want to do with these distances and all that sort of stuff. So I have I have the ability to control that and then save those as part of these presets. And then when I want to apply rules automatically, I could just grab my full resort processing and drop it on here. And now when I import this thing, it will come in with all of these rules applied. And so let me show you that. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this residence area that I have right there. And now I'm just going to go ahead. I don't want to overwrite the prefab I created previously because I just want to demonstrate this. I'm going to hit import, and it's going to apply these full resource post-processing while I'm at it. So I'll hit import, and again, this will take about 40 seconds to import. And there we go. So it pops back into our scene and has everything already set up on it, just like we had with the previous one. So as we can see, using the PiXYZ 2018.3 plugin, we can take just about 40 seconds, a few clicks, a little bit of setup, and we can bring in our data and really start to build it and improve upon it for this visual quality. While still maintaining all of our BIM data, we can add interactivity and just sort of these awesome new workflows. So there we go. Hopefully use this opportunity to try out Unity, try out the new PiXYZ plugin, bring your data into Unity, and build something really cool.